Okay, I'm sorry I had to stop the video. I had to stop the video because the Crisco, I'm going to move you guys up while I explain this. The Crisco that I had in the refrigerator happened to be what I fried the donuts in last. And if you fried something in the Crisco, you cannot use it for dough. It's a frying one, and apparently I forgot when I fried. So, what I said is you can definitely use the packaged Crisco. And these have been in my refrigerator for a while. And what you're going to do is, this measures out to about 2/3 of a cup. So I'm just going to cut this and make it even. Now, if you're using this type of Crisco, what you're going to want to basically do is cut it into chunks. And you're going to want to work fast because you're going to want your Crisco chilled. You don't want it to, especially if it's a hot day, you don't want it to get too warm. Now, I'm going to move you guys back down for a second so you can see this. Now that I have the salt, the baking powder, and all of that in here, I'm just going to pulse it a minute and get it combined. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add our Crisco to this. And like I said, this is 2/3 of a cup of shortening, so I do need to add more shortening to this. And I apologize, that's Edward that's just barking right now. So that's 2/3 of a cup. So I'm going to add 2/3. I'm going to add one third. So I'm going to add 1/3 more of the shortening, and that'll give me 1 cup of shortening. And 1/3 cup of shortening. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to pulse this. And the reason you want to pulse this versus having it on high is you don't want to overwork your dough. And you want to do this until your dough starts to look like cornmeal. And if you're not experienced with cornmeal, I will show you kind of what it's going to look like. I'm going to show you what it should look like. Now this goes both for if you're doing the peach slices and if you're doing the peach pie. And your flour consistency should look like this, which is why you're not going to want to run it on high for a minute. You're just going to want to pulse it. You're going to want to pulse it anywhere from 20 to 30 times interval, especially if you're doing a large batch. If you're doing a normal pie dough, 5 to 10 pulses should get your shortening in there. Now, you might be wondering, you might be saying, well, Joe, you only put 1 cup of shortening in there. Your recipe calls for 1.5 cups. Yes, it does, and we're going to use 1/2 cup of butter instead of 1/2 cup of shortening. Because this will give my shortening the consistency that it needs to be. And one stick of butter is a half a cup. And you're going to do the same exact thing that you did with the butter that you did with the shortening. You're going to cut your butter into chunks. You're going to cut these into small chunks. And again, make sure your butter is in the refrigerator. Sometimes you can use it right from the freezer. However, it is going to be harder to cut if you take it out of the freezer. Now, if you forgot to refrigerate your flour or you forgot to refrigerate your shortening, don't fret. Throw it in the freezer for about 1 hour and it should chill enough for you to work it. And you're going to do the exact same thing that you did with the Crisco, only this time you're doing it with the butter. Now, I have some butter pieces that unfortunately didn't merge. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to help it along, and I'm going to break these a little bit so that my butter gets incorporated in with the pie dough crust. Hopefully not spill anything. And sometimes you do need to hold the pulse button for a few seconds just to allow the butter to work itself down to the blade so it can get... Yeah, and I still have these big pieces, so I'm just gonna help it along by breaking the butter. You actually, when you cut the butter, make sure to cut it into smaller chunks rather than pieces. And I'm just gonna get all of this incorporated. Okay, I'm gonna stop the video for a second. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. I had quite a few more butter pieces that I needed to break, and I did run it on high for about 25 seconds just to incorporate the butter on the bottom. And you're going to want to, if you use butter and it doesn't do that, just make sure you don't overdo the dough. You just want to do that for a couple of seconds just to incorporate everything. And I'm going to show you again what it looks like. You are going to see pieces of butter, and that's okay if they're small. But your butter should be pretty much combined, and there's one piece that didn't get combined, which will get combined. Actually, I need to break this piece up into smaller. You basically now want your dough to look like little coarse cornmeal. I'm just gonna pulse this again for a few seconds. Now I am doing it a little bit longer because I have so much shortening and so much butter in here that it just needs to incorporate. Now we have not added our water. That's going to be our next thing. I just want these butter pieces to combine, and sometimes it's a little bit hard, especially when you're doing a lot of flour in the food processor for all the butter to combine. And it is okay to have small pieces of butter actually show up, because what that's going to do is that's going to give you a very rich texture of a crust. I'm going to move you. Oops, sorry, Shadow. My poor Pomeranian, she likes to lay either on the air conditioner or right in front of the sink, and she chose today of all days to lay in front of the sink. So I'm just cleaning up. Now, the next phase of this recipe is the cold water. And you definitely want to make sure that your water is ice cold. If you have a refrigerator that has a tap for water, use it. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. Is I'm going to get my big measuring cup. And for this recipe, it uses 2/3. The index cards will tell you what amount of water. Sometimes you're going to use more water. Sometimes you're going to use less water. It all depends on how your flour has done. I'm just going to put a little bit of ice in the water. And the reason you want to put ice in your water is that will make your water much, much colder, which is what you really want when it comes to a pie dough. And I'm just going to fill this up to the 2 cup. I'm not using 2 cups of water. This recipe only uses 2/3 of a cup, but you want to make sure you have enough water, because like I said, sometimes you'll use more water, sometimes you'll use less. It all depends on your pie dough. Now, you might be wondering, if you're using a food processor, how are you going to pour the water into the food processor without getting the ice in? Well, that's where... And I gotta find the thing. That's where one of these comes in very handy. This is a very small strainer that I actually use sometimes for gravies and stuff, but it works in a pinch with your food processor because it's small enough just to sit in here and you can actually pour. And you're gonna do this a little bit at a time. You're not gonna pour a lot in, and you're gonna pulse it after you do it. So I'm just going to add a little bit of water at a time. And I'm just going to pulse it. And this is definitely where you want to be careful with how you do your pie dough. You don't want to over process it at this point. And what I like to do is I like to go in and feel how the dough is. If your dough is starting to stick together like this, it's almost done. If it's crumbly, I'm gonna bring you in. When you can pinch your dough like this, if it holds together, like you can see, that's not really holding together. That means that it does not quite have enough water. Once you're able to actually bring it together and it stays together, that means your dough is done. So I don't quite have enough flour in this, I don't have quite enough water yet in this. So I'm going to add a little bit more water. And that should maybe do it. And sometimes you need to help this out. I'm gonna just bring this down so it mixes. Yeah, and I can tell this is getting to the point where it's starting to do what I need it to do. Just gonna pulse it a couple more seconds. You might be wondering why I'm doing this while I'm mixing up the flour with the water, because you don't want one area of your dough just to be water. Okay. And I think this is about... Yeah, see how this is now staying together? That's exactly what you want your dough to do. And I'm going to show you guys that when your dough does this and it doesn't break apart, sorry, when your dough does this and does not break apart, stop. Don't add any more liquid to it. Don't pulsate it anymore. It's done. Now, what we need to do is we need to form these into 2 discs. So, I'm going to move this stuff over here for a second. And it really helps if you have like a huge cutting, not cutting board, but a countertop. Unfortunately, I have a small cutting board for this size of a house. And sometimes it's hard to do stuff with this. So give me a minute while I clean up this. I'm going to show you the next part of this. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to chill your dough. Watch out, both. Just clean my hands. It's so easy to get dough under your fingernails. Okay, so just cleaning off my countertop. Okay, now I'm going to use the press and seal, and I'm going to put you guys down. I'm actually going to stop you guys for a second because this has gotten to 10 minutes. I'm going to get set up with the press and seal, and I will be right back and show you what we're going to do.